Gaza Humanitarian Fund, not only was the question of what is humanitarian about it, it became a real killing machine.
I think yesterday the count was officially 38 violations of the ceasefire since it came into place.
The main perpetrator is getting all the protections, and the victims are not perceived at all as victims. Their entire experience has been erased.
The point that there is a sustained ceasefire, actually, it's really incumbent on academics to turn to the question of the reconstruction of academic space in Gaza. So I was in Geneva last week for Peace Week. How we still have Peace Week.
Yeah, no peace but Peace Week.
Exactly. But it was really remarkable to me, the extent of conversations around what next, around, yes, we have a ceasefire, what's going to happen next, how do we think about governance, what do we think about the economy, what do we think about disarmament, everything under the sun. Nothing about justice, nothing about accountability.
But that was like a feature from the beginning. Like people started speaking about the day after, I think like what, a month after
Indeed.
October 7th and the beginning of the genocide. So,
and it's a persistent feature of history also.
Yeah.
I mean, that, you know, any of these conversations around accountability have always stayed at a certain level, but they've never really come to any fruition.
And I think this is like, it's always, I feel, with Palestine or Israel-Palestine, it depends on like how you want to frame it. There is like, we see patterns that we know already, but they are much more extreme.
Yeah.
So like with the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, not only was the entire issue of the question of what is humanitarian about it, it became a real killing machine. So now with the peace process or the deal, or I don't know how they want to call it, we see a situation where the main perpetrator is getting all the protections, and the victims are not only, they don't have a say about their future, they just are not perceived at all as victims. They have been erased, their entire experience has been erased, and now they are turning into just a classical conflict zone, post-conflict zone, that you just need to develop and try to make as much money as you can out of it.
Exactly. And roll out your mainstream post-conflict mechanisms that might otherwise be, I mean, we're in this moment of ceasefire.
Yeah.
No ceasefire.
Yeah, no ceasefire.
I mean, I think yesterday the count was officially 38 violations of the ceasefire since it came into place, but then more last night. I was just speaking to some friends in Gaza City last night, and the bombing was everywhere. So it's remarkable how it's just disappeared from, you know, I mean, this is still the mainstream narrative, right? We're in this moment of ceasefire. This is exactly how it was in Geneva. The whole focus of the conversation was around, this is a moment of hope, this is a moment of optimism. It's unbelievable. I mean, really.
No, it's
really,
all
just,
I heard a Palestinian saying yesterday after the slaughter of this family that was on her way back to Gaza, that is like, they are telling us to not cross the line, but we don't know where the line is. So it's like we had all this critique about empires going and just drawing a line in the sand and deciding what is the border, but they didn't even draw the line in the sand. I mean, it's like, it's just...
Where is the line?
Where is the line? No one knows where is the line. And I feel really the main motivation around this deal, aside from Trump's wish to have a Nobel Prize, it's just that everyone, and by everyone I mean all governments and international bodies, just want to go back to October 6th.
Yes.
In the sense that for Netanyahu, what the ceasefire meant is that at least now the hostages' families are not in the street. And for other governments, they were hoping, and they are probably hoping, and that's something that we, the public, should really remember, that just the protests will stop. And that like all the processes that began around about around sanctions for Israel will just disappear. So we saw the EU already saying, yeah, if the ceasefire holds, then we're not going to sanction Israel, which means that they just disregard all the rest.
It was just getting too dangerously close to having to actually
do
take any kind of action. And now they're relinquished of that responsibility in their eyes.
But I don't know, how do you think we really can make sure that people don't fall into this trap of the ceasefire? I mean, of course, all of us would like to have the slaughter of Palestinians stop, and it is better than nothing. But how do we keep all the momentum around Palestine? That, especially here in Italy, we saw such an amazing mobilization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you. I think there's lots of different narratives on this deal and what it was and what it wasn't. But again, from the perspectives of colleagues in Gaza, it had to stop.
Yeah, of course.
And even if this is the worst deal, worse than Oslo, worse than anything that's come before, the immediacy of the genocide had to stop. That doesn't mean the genocide stops, of course.
No.
But moving forwards, I mean, how do we keep mobilizing, or what do we keep mobilizing around? I mean, I think this question or the absence of justice and accountability in all of these conversations is maybe the starting point for the public and for academics and for those who are interested in kind of trying to keep a critical engagement in this. Right?
But it really means that for us, it's like we should continue as if nothing happened, like acknowledging that the killing en masse for now, I don't know, it's hard to say after yesterday, but the killing en masse was reduced at least, but that we should continue with the same actions as if nothing happened, because the occupation is still there, the siege is still there.
Of course.
We don't see any possible trajectory for, like you say, for justice for Palestine and Palestinians. No sanctions on Israel.
So I mean, tangibly, nothing's really changed.
Yeah.
So the work is all still there to do, as it was.
And really to remind ourselves also that, if we really take the legal definition of genocide, nothing in Israel's intentions changed. I mean, we don't know what happened behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And what led really for Netanyahu to say, okay, this time.
But also, it's okay for Gaza, but what's happening in the West Bank?
In the West Bank,
exactly. I mean, just this week around Nablus, 70 hectares of land taken. I mean,
I think
continuing constantly. So,
Gaza throughout the last 2 years has been just allowed Israel to do whatever it wanted in the West Bank, and as much as some people try to make sure we look also at the West Bank, and it's clear that now the ceasefire will be this very detrimental time for the West Bank, because that's now the moment that no one even looks at the West Bank. Indeed. And everyone are just saying if the ceasefire holds or it doesn't.
I think I mean, as you said, action continues. All of this mobilization must continue, continuing to amplify the reality of what's happening. It's also, the case that there's an ever diminishing number of Palestinian journalists in Gaza. There's an ever diminishing amount of information that we have. So it's very much incumbent on us to make sure that is widely shared, especially as it obviously will disappear from the mainstream media for as long as this ceasefire narrative is perpetuated.
But what do you think would be the main role now for academics? Because both of us are very much involved around the question of evacuations and seeing.
Well, so there's that piece. I mean, there's everything to do. There's, as you said, we've both been very much involved in the evacuation of scholars and students from Gaza to Europe, to the UK and elsewhere. I think some of that work is sort of easing up now, in the sense that many well, we've managed to, some have been able to leave.
There were some successes in the UK, in Italy.
There were some successes. And now, in fact, we're getting, we're mid-October. Some universities are also saying if students aren't here now, then I'm sorry, but it's going to have to wait until next year. Is something that we're facing. What we're still continuing to work on is, while universities have been willing to put up some funding for some students, it's funding to cover fees. It's not funding necessarily to cover living expenses, let alone acknowledging the fact that all of these students are going to be sending most of their financial support back to their families who have absolutely nothing. So
and needing a lot of support, just mental support once they are arriving.
Absolutely. But there's also been very little political will to bring family members, to bring dependents. We've had a lot of cases of students who had places to study, for example, in the UK, who were able to leave Gaza, but they had to leave their children behind.
This is really,
So
I have a friend like that, like her one son is now in Egypt, one son is in South Africa, and she's with the little one.
For everything we know about what separation does to families, this is...
No, and especially after 2 years in which, and Palestinian families have always been targeted by Israel. There has been, this idea that they will cut the family line and they will break them apart, if through imprisonment or by targeting them.
It's a very consistent way of supporting that policy to perpetuate, absolutely. But I think, if we are in a moment of ceasefire, which again, we're not really, so many hypotheticals. But at the point that there is a sustained ceasefire, actually, it's really incumbent on academics to turn to the question of the reconstruction of academic space in Gaza. And not only taking students and scholars out as at-risk, individuals, but the reality is that every university, every higher education institution has been destroyed. There is no possibility other than online for those who have access online.
And even that is very limited.
That is very limited to continue their education. Not even beginning to think about high school education or primary education.
I know that on high school education they managed to do it. I have a friend of a son that just finished his tests. So I think there is really a level of resilience. He did the tests. He was studying. There is a level of resilience that I think we don't even begin to grasp in Gaza, and especially around education. And I think that makes really the abandonment of Palestinians in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, because we know that institutions are also targeted there, even more painful. Because this is really, time and again, you see how much they put an effort to make sure that education continues. I had a friend who said, obviously we will invest in education because all we have is the future. So I think this is really a clear call for academics to, like you say, to really put pressure on rebuilding the education system in Gaza, and also making efforts now to accommodate students, if it's online, if it's by evacuations.
Absolutely. But really through active partnerships with universities in Gaza, the structures are destroyed, the libraries are destroyed, the databases, the archives are destroyed, but actually, scholars are still there, and the networks of those scholars are still there. And that's a fundamental role that our institutions could now play. Would be to support, and to support that rebuilding as led by Palestinian scholars in Gaza without a kind of, without an imposed agenda, but also again without just cherry picking the best and bringing them to Europe and meaning that there's no possibility for that to continue. So I think that's one kind of very practical area that academics and our institutions have a role to play.
That's one side of it, although, because the other side is really the pressure on Israel, because being an Israeli Jewish myself, I see the level of pressure that every talk about sanction raises there. There is real anxiety, especially in academia, because there is tension between the academia and the government, not around Gaza and not around the occupation. So I think it is really, really essential to keep on the pressure in this direction, because this is one non-violent tool that we have to try to envisage another kind of a regime there, another kind of a society that maybe one day will be cured of its Jewish superiority and this deep sense of victimization that goes hand in hand with the victimization and the killing and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians.
And I think that's maybe something that, if we go back to the ICJ ruling and the provisional measures around genocide, I think that's maybe, it's a really interesting shift happened then. Many people critiqued the ruling, it wasn't enough, it didn't go far enough, etc. But actually, a really interesting shift started to occur among sports organisations, within the media, within academia. There have been calls for boycott for decades. Yeah. There have been people working relentlessly around BDS for a very, very long time. And suddenly, this threat of being complicit in genocide did something, actually, I think, to wake people up. And it has led to the emergence of different kinds of accountability mechanisms being, enacted and developed in different states. And as you say, this is exactly the moment that we need to capitalize on now in kind of keeping up the pressure and making sure that that we do continue to hold our institutions, wherever those institutions are, to account in all of this.
And really remember also that what Palestinians are demanding of us is also an opportunity for our universities, because eventually it moves us towards a more democratic institutions in general. And I think that in the face of the rise of extreme right all over Europe, if not most of the world currently, we really need to realize that Palestine is not just asking us to help Palestine, but it actually has a political agenda that we can all benefit from.
Much broader.
And especially at this moment, if we will be very clear on the question of Palestine, I think it will be easier for us in the future to be very clear in the face of fascist powers and demands that, as we know, will always try to go after the academia as their first target. So this is for me always something that we need to remember, that the last 2 years clarified that Palestine is not an isolated vernacular case that happens there in the Middle East. No, it touches, it has transnational relations to Europe, to the US, to the world, and
absolutely.
And we shouldn't forget that.
So I completely agree with you. I also think, though, that there's another role for academia in all of this in terms of the actual content of the work that we do. And it's, interesting to maybe, we're having this conversation, thinking about our disciplinary backgrounds a little bit at the intersection of law and anthropology. But in, honing in on these questions of accountability and holding our institutions to account, I think it's also incumbent on us to really reconsider the meaning of justice and accountability in a context such as this. I mean, there's a wealth of evidence and research from other contexts of mass atrocity, genocide, that high-level accountability mechanisms, while very important and while, absolutely to be pursued, they don't deliver for so-called everyday people. Or communities in all of their diversity and complexity.
And for historical justice also.
Absolutely. And so I think within our academic work, there's also a very important space to be held for trying to engage with what justice might come to mean for Palestinians, specifically Palestinians in Gaza, but actually Palestinians
in general,
or as a whole, but also not as a whole, because this is another, this is a whole other piece in all of this, has been the reduction of Palestinians to Gazan or, you know, this kind of homogenous group who have experienced this atrocity, when actually we know there's been so much diversity in the way that that's been experienced.
There has been diversity, but I think we cannot, for me there is always the locus of what connects everything together, what connects the last 2 years in Gaza and the previous years in Gaza to the West Bank, to Palestinians in diaspora.
Absolutely, but again, all of those histories differ, and they differ from their intergenerational experiences of trauma.
There is no question about it.
Stemming back from the 40s.
But I think also alternative models of justice, really one of their advantages is really to give a place for different voices and different narratives, and not to try and create this one homogeneous narrative.
Exactly, absolutely. And I think within that, another, you know, part of what academia needs to do is, or maybe what academia can do, is hold the space for really challenging what justice can or cannot be after atrocity, including, you know, a strong sense of ambivalence towards justice, or the possibility that maybe justice can't be served for this, or that there are aspects of this that are really irreconcilable. And these are really difficult questions and thoughts to hold, because obviously we want to move forward, and we want to see accountability come, and we want to see dignity restored. But I also think it's really important to closely listen to what our Palestinian colleagues in Gaza are saying, and to, at least within academia, if we can't do it within mainstream accountability mechanisms, of course, but at least create a space to acknowledge that, you know, complexity, and to really grapple with what these concepts come to mean in the aftermath of such grave atrocity.
And also maybe what it means not to try to move forward so quickly.
Right.
Not only on Palestine, like Palestine is one issue that has been very present in our life in the last 2 years, and prior to that for the both of us. But I think really to learn how to not move forward, I think, and not try to run after the next subject and close the door and say, okay, we dealt with that.
And just brush genocide under the carpet, like it's done now.
Yeah.
So, absolutely.